I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us, a bit of a regular guest. Lots of fireworks on last time, but always very smart, very cerebral. She's out with her third quarter report. I'm giving it away here. The Solar report. This is her third quarter report. It's a lot about China. Some other stuff's in there, too. It's a lot to it. I can't cover it all. Very nicely done, slickly done, great information inside of it, very well thought out. I have, in case you haven't guessed already, Catherine Austin Fitz. Catherine Austin Fitz, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Hey, I've been practicing in case we talk about the Middle East.
Spirited debate. There's nothing wrong with spirited debate. I want to start off with, it's in your report, in this third quarter report, and we'll move on to the fourth quarter here, but one of the things that you said, and this was a very gripping thing, that's why the whole thing's about China, or a lot of it is about China, and that is you cannot avoid and you cannot ignore the Chinese market. It's just too big and too important. Okay, so that was a very key point about the Chinese market investing globally, and you said that it's the canary in the coal mine, and both economies, U.S. and Chinese economies, have to do well for both countries to do well. I want to go right to the South China Sea. More warnings. This is before, I mean, we've had the problem before, but some pretty stern warnings from the Chinese to the U.S. and Obama in the South China Sea. What's going on there?
Well, the Chinese are trying to assert jurisdiction over the South China Seas, and the reality is if the U.S. is going to keep the Bretton Woods system going, it's got to patrol the sea lanes. And if you look at the amount of trade and traffic that goes through the South China Sea, it's extraordinary. So if the U.S. gives an inch on this, you know, it's basically you're cracking wide open and shifting to a multipolar world really fast. So the U.S. cannot basically walk away from its responsibility to police the sea, and all the allies in Asia are going to shift if we don't stand strong on this one. It's one of the reasons we're stepping down in the Middle East is so we can pivot to the east and protect the South China Seas.
Do you think this? I mean, the Chinese are beating some war drums. They are saying some nasty warlike things. And the U.S. is also sending their ships into the area and, you know, maybe trying to provoke them. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think war can break out?
If you look at the two countries from a military standpoint, from what we know, China just doesn't have the power to ultimately stand down the United States if the United States insists. But the reality is if you look at what they're doing in space, if you look at what they're doing in terms of building out aircraft carriers, they're building towards a point when they can. And this is the reason why this is at the heart of the question is we're moving from, you know, a unipolar world to a multipolar world. And that has real implications in terms of whether it's watching over the sea lanes or who's got the satellites or, you know, are we going to have alternatives to the IMF like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, right? And that's what we're trying to sort out institutionally, with military, with trade. How do we move to a more multipolar world?
A lot of chatter on my site about the AIIB, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, and that they're getting included, the yuan, the Chinese, are getting included into the SDR, Special Drawing Rights Currency. And a lot of people are suspecting that the dollar could take a big hit. I know you just looked up the U.S. dollar on the U.S. dollar on the USDX index. I mean, do American companies want the dollar to go down? Is the dollar going to take a big hit because of this?
The market share of the dollar has been steadily falling in terms of its role in trade, and that's going to continue. And you see the other countries, particularly China, building out more liquidity on their currency. So one of the reasons the IMF started to stall on including the yuan was they didn't have the liquidity and the sort of infrastructure in place, and they continue to build that out, which is why I think the IMF is relenting. But the reality is there really is nothing to replace the dollar yet. The euro is headed in the opposite direction, and the Chinese currency isn't strong enough, which is why the SDR basket, which is a basket, is so important. But there's really nothing to replace the dollar yet. So I don't think the dollar's in any danger of collapsing. It's going to continue to lose market share. And at some point, we're going to evolve to something else.
Speaking of the dollar, is the Fed going to raise interest rates? I mean, American companies, I think this is one of the things we talked about last time we were on it, they can't want the dollar to go up. Dreadful retail sales, dreadful, they don't want the dollar. Is the Fed Reserve really going to raise rates? And if they don't, is there going to be a downside to that?
A 60% chance they'll raise rates.
Do what?
Here's why they'll
Say it
I
again.
think there's a 50 to 60% chance they raise rates.
Ah, why?
They may have and again, but you have the entire world of pension funds and insurance companies, which are critical to the stability of the financial system, and they're choking on not being able to get enough yield, and their fixed income portfolios are rolling over. They need yield, Greg. So you've had a massive subsidization of big government and large corporations by savers and pension funds all over the world. I don't see how you keep that going forever. So I think if they do raise them, it's going to be very nominal. It's going to be an eighth to a quarter. So they'll raise it 18 to 12 to 25 basis points. It'll be very tiny. But I just think they cannot afford the precedent of a zero interest rate world for too much longer.
Do you think that will cause the bond market to, ding, 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 we're at the lows, it's going up from here, and a sell-off, and the stock market sell off? Could we have a big crash for this? Or not a big crash, but a beginnings of a crash?
The stock market's been transitioning now for years, but the last 2 years, people have been getting ready to shift and shifting money. So if you look at where the money's flowing, it's been flowing looking for different places to go. It's one of the reasons that the stock market has done so well, despite the fundamentals, is people are, the bond market's about twice as big as the stock market, so they're looking for places to go. If they raise interest rates, yes, you're going to see another jump of shift, and that's why there's so much concern about what's the liquidity in the bond market going to be, particularly with the mutual funds and ETFs. I don't think it's going to be a problem with individual bonds, but mutual funds and ETFs, you could start to see some action.
So Christine Lagarde is making these public warnings again. I mean, it's not like she can't just get on the phone and call over to Janet Yellen. I mean, she's got her number. But the IMF makes these big warnings. Why are they making these big public warnings? Are they doing this so when the bond market and or the stock market, and I guess the real estate market would follow suit with, 30-year money at 4% or less, is she making a public statement that hey, we told them to raise rates? Is that what she's doing?
Well, one of the rules of the establishment is to say what you're going to do before you do it, and they don't always agree. And I think Lagarde's just trying to say, hey, things are they're real problems. Because if you look at what's going on in Southern Europe, there's a great cover of The Economist, The Last Economist, where it had the subprime. It had 3 books, and they were falling over like dominoes, and it had the subprime mortgage falling over into the European debt crisis, which is not over, into the emerging market debt crisis. And Lagarde is still struggling with the European debt crisis, and the last thing she needs is an emerging market debt crisis to, take off. Because if you look at Europe, the export juggernaut in Europe has exported a lot. Germany has exported a lot to the emerging markets. So the emerging markets go down. It's gonna take this rolling debt crisis and bring it all the way back to home, and that's what they're trying to avoid.
Lagarde is an expert in derivatives. Is she worried about there is a contagion in the derivative market? I mean, we have officially, according to the Bank of International Settlements, a quadrillion, 1,000 trillion. So is there a little fear there in her mind that, this could unwind?
Here's the thing. The derivatives layer on top of everything. So, whatever your small problem is in the stock or bond market, you got a bigger problem in the derivative market. The mother lode of the derivatives were issued as interest rate swaps. So, the biggest book there is interest rate swaps, and no one's ever lived through rising interest rates with a big book of interest swap derivatives outstanding.
First time.
Yeah, this is, think of this as we're virgins at doing this. And the reality is, what I pray is that all of these guys have the analytics they need to even know what that looks like and what it means.
Well, so, which brings me to my next point. You talk about fear factor. And I got to tell you, in the last couple of years, I thought it would go bad in 12, and it didn't. And I thought it would go 13, and you said, nope. I've been interviewed for several years. 14, I didn't think it was an election year, and we agreed on that. And 15, I just thought, wow, it was so bad in September, the Fed Reserve couldn't raise rates 0.25%. Something happened. We had a flash crash. Baltic Dry Index is going down. Retail sales are going down. Everything is tanking at the same time. And my question is, do you think we're going to get a crash? Well, maybe not by the end of this year, but do you think we're going to get a crash in 16 during the election cycle?
No, I don't. I think well, first of all, if you look at how fragile the geopolitics are, the danger, as I've always said, is we go to violence and anything could happen, and then things really come unhinged.
That's what you said before a market crash. You said we'd have war. Right. Is that still your prediction?
Right. So I'm worried about violence and war and that kind of situation getting out of hand, because that's when you get the real dangerous scenarios. The reality is the big mother lode on the whole planet, Greg, whether you're talking derivatives, you're talking the stock market, you're talking the bond markets, is the U.S. federal budget. And what's slowly beginning to happen is the dawning realization that we're going to have to not only just re-engineer or cut the federal budget, we're talking about reinventing the U.S. economy, okay? And some very extraordinary choices. It's why nobody wanted to be the speaker. Paul Ryan did not want to be the speaker because Paul Ryan knows this is coming. They'll probably be able to delay it till after the election, but then after the election, we're going to have to sit down and say, we can't keep doing this. Now, why is that relevant? All the markets globally work off the federal budget. I mean, it's extraordinary, the dependency of all these different markets on cash flows and credit, because the credit is much bigger than the cash flows. The credit and cash flows coming out of that budget are enormous. And the reality is it has to be re-engineered. So that's going to be a 2017 issue. And that's going to be a very shocking experience for many people globally.
You mean that welfare is going to be cut, military is going to be cut, everything has to be. We don't intend to pay back this $20 trillion. I mean, that's the fallacy of Fox Business debate was, hey, come on. We don't intend to pay it back, right? We're going to default on it. We're going to just print money.
It's no problem. We just print the dollars off the computer. So we can keep this game going as long as people will take the dollar. Well, and that's a military question.
And that's the key phrase.
It's been a military question for since World War II. So, the reality is, and that's the difficulty the leadership has getting out of looking like bullies. They're trying to keep the game going, and the question is, how did they get out of this game, and how did they keep the game going without being a bully? Well, you can't do it without radical re-engineering of the federal budget.
And a lot of people losing money, and a lot of people losing their entitlements, and a lot of people not getting paid, correct? I mean, they're going to have to stop with all the debt. Do what?
Do we want to allocate our resources according to what's political, or do we want to allocate our resources according to what's productive? Because the secret when you re-engineer the federal budget is we've been putting our money behind what's political. If you put your money behind what's productive, there's extraordinary improvement in wealth creation that you can get. There's a great interview that I always use from Alan Grayson where he's complaining about the bailouts that I think you've had Congressman Grayson on.
I have not. I've talked about him with the Federal Reserve because he hates them.
So he gets to the point where he says, in capitalism, winners have to win and losers have to lose. Well, all across the world, you have winners who've been manipulated, cut, stolen from by the federal budget, and they're sitting around not being productive. If you switch that and start to let the winners win and the losers lose, there's a lot that can go on that's good. I'm not making any sense. You're confusing it.
The fear porn. You brought up the fear porn, and that you said that you wouldn't have any more fear, but there's a lot of really fearful facts that are out there. The budget deficit at $19-20 trillion and counting. Our commitments. I had David Stockman on, and he says, this is going to blow. He's in your camp, incidentally. He says they're going to have to raise interest rates. That's just going to have to happen. He says he thinks it'll happen before the end of the election cycle. He says there's just no way it can't happen. Isn't that real fear and real facts, not just fear porn?
Well, but here's the thing. What I care about, if you look at the statistics, the number one killer of people in the United States is heart attacks. Okay, now let me say it another way. The number one killer is they die of a broken heart. So, I just spent a lot of time outside the country this year, and one of the things that struck me in all the different countries where I was is how much happier people were than they are in the United States. And right now, everyone in the United States is frozen, or many people are frozen in fear, and they're in a very negative space. And the reality is, we need to be discerning about the risks before us. We need to be, it's what a friend of mine who used to be in the FBI says, we need strong situational awareness. At the same time, the source of life is joy. So, if we destroy our joy and we don't, build the future that we want to build, we're dead. So you can't sit around, I'm day to day, I'm an investment advisor, and I work with so many people cleaning them up from the harm done to their spirits and their money by sitting in and doing everything out of fear. If you look at the risk that we face, Greg, there's not enough time and money. You have to be a billionaire to deal with all the risks. So, the way to succeed in life is to focus on the positive that you want to build and build that, and you have to operate out of faith. I'm not saying don't be aware of these things. You and I are in the business of helping people be aware, but you can't live in that fear. And fear has become an addiction. The fear porn has become an addiction.
Well, but there are some real things to be fearful of, is my point. I mean, you're talking about a quarter of a point rise that could dislocate the markets, a quarter of a point rise that the Fed could not do, didn't feel it could do in September after telling everybody it could. Isn't that legitimate fear that the markets are that bad that a quarter point rise could be ding, ding, ding on the bond bell and everything would crash?
Well, I have to tell you, we've become drama queens. No, a quarter of a point is not going to destroy the world. People are going to get.
How about 1% interest rates at the federal funds level? How about that? Just 1%. How would that do with interest rate derivatives?
That's pretty shocking.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. A 1% federal funds rate, and that spells disaster. Isn't that real fear? How about just normalization of rates at 4 to 5%? Normalization of the federal funds rate. How about that?
Here's the reality. If, history says that if you raise the interest rates within 150 basis points a year, the equity markets don't tank. And if the equity markets don't tank, the economy doesn't tank. Okay? Now, we've known for years we're coming into a turn in the bond market, and a lot of people have gotten ready for it. Not to say that you can get 100% ready. So it depends on how strong and how shocking and how fast it is. But we're going to have to make this turn. I came out of the Bush administration thinking it was an emergency that we made this turn. Okay, I started a company in 1990 to help the country make the turn. And, blah, 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 blah. And instead, we decided to have a phony baloney debt bubble. So we've needed to, if I thought it was an emergency in 1990 as somebody who was expert in the federal budget, imagine where we are now. But the reality is we got to make the turn. So better this year than next year, better next year than the year after. We've got to do it. So I wish we'd done it slow and gradual the way we could have done it in 1990, but we are where we are.
I mean,
let's go.
But that's going to be a disaster. I mean, that is some real fear. My point, that's some real.
No,
I just tell the look on your face. The look on your face when I said 1% federal funds rate was like, right?
Well, it's going to be shocking, but something. we can listen. Our ancestors, whether they lived on the prairie or came here, I had a great grandmother who lived in a dirt cabin house with no electricity and no indoor plumbing, and no heating, with a family of 10. Okay, so they did it. We can do it. Now, I'm not saying we're going back to cabins with dirt floors, but something. We have to move out of this bubble where we don't know how to deal with real trouble. Real trouble is upon us. Let's deal with it. The thing that scares me is when we don't deal with it. So if we spend another year at zero interest rates, that's what terrifies me. I've been terrified since 1990, watching an entire society of people around me not willing to deal with real problems. That's what scares me. So,
Stockman says the same thing you do.
What?
Stockman says about the same thing you do, that we're going to have to raise rates. All there is to it. They are going to have to be raised, or they're going to raise. Either way, this has got to end. He was very clear about it. And that's what you're saying, too, that 0% has to end.
But let's look at the whole balance sheet, because what we're talking about with interest rates or bonds or equities is on one side of the balance sheet. The other side of the balance sheet is how 325 million Americans behave every day. You know, I keep bringing this up. Somebody sent me the grocery sales in America ending June 30, 2015. We spent $2.2 billion on fresh food and vegetables. Guess how much we spent on carbonated drinks?
$5 billion?
$10 billion. $10 billion, Greg. $10 billion. You know, if you look at the history of civilization, you can poison a civilization to death with sugar. So, you know, if you look at how we spend our time, if you look at how we spend our money, people are always saying, you know, we need the government to help us develop communities. No, what we need is, if you look at how much money we spend on the lottery, how much money we spend on hard narcotics, how much money we spend, or how much time we spend watching television, how much money we spend on, you know, processed food and sugar, we have enough money under our control to turn this around.
This is what you talk about, re-engineering the economy.
Right. So if you look at the balance sheet, we have to re-engineer both sides. And we have to re-engineer it one person, one family, one community at a time, bottom up, as well as re-engineering the federal budget. And if we do, if we shift to much more radical productivity, it's what I said, the winners need to be able to win and the losers need to be able to lose. If we shift and we do that, there's a lot of wealth that can be created. And one of the reasons is the new technology. If you look at what's coming out of the lab, it's going to dramatically, it's doing it now. It's dramatically improving productivity. It's one of the reasons we're insourcing stuff to America. I saw an editorial in the Wall Street Journal by a business guy who was saying, you know, that 10 years ago it was a factor of 5 times more profitable to outsource to China. Robotics has brought it down to 2.5. So there's a lot of positive, but the reality is, if we don't change, Greg, we're headed into a wall. So let's change, because the change, it's possible, and there's tremendous opportunities here.
If we are headed into, if there's going to be losers, how do the losers lose? How are they going to lose? They're going to have massive unemployment? Are there going to be massive losses in the bond market? How do the losers lose?
Very good question. You're going to see a lot of big companies who've been making money from government contracts. They're going to lose, because small business entrepreneurs are going to, you know, it's the Uber problem. You're going to take things that are very big and you're going to be able to relocalize or outsource them in a variety of ways. So any big companies that have major contracts off of the federal government run the risk of losing unless they change.
Whew, that's a lot.
Government contracts. Right.
Boeing, Northrop Grumman, you know, you name them. There's tons.
If they're doing military work, they might not lose. So, you know, that's a little bit trickier. But on the domestic, what they're doing domestically, a lot of that could lose.
So they
could be.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish. I'm sorry.
So the other losers could be people who are getting a lot of government checks, or people who are not paying their taxes. So people who've been avoiding or getting away from taxes could lose. People who are getting big government checks could lose, depending on whether they're productive or not. So, and Social Security, the big losers, really, if you move to productivity, would be the whole healthcare industry. Now, you know, very productive doctors, nurses, healthcare people would be freed up. So if you look at people on the ground who are doing the work, the teachers, both in education and healthcare, the highly productive people are going to be much better off, but you've got layers and layers of bureaucracy there that's going to be much worse off.
And do you think? So do you think you think the Fed will raise interest rates? They're going to spoil everybody's Christmas in December. You think they're going to raise in December?
I think there's about a 50 to 60% chance they'll bump them a nominal amount, but just nominal. What they're trying to do is not set off an emerging market debt crisis. That's what they don't want to do.
Which they may. I mean, you just don't know it. You know, Wall Street, they'll front run every trade they can.
Right.
So
exactly.
What has not come out in this third quarter that didn't happen yet which is this an amazing report. And I want to bring this up. It's about the ISIS, the Paris attack. I mean, I was reading a headline. I'm in St. Louis, and the Post-Dispatch, the headline was, France wants a coalition, calling up 115,000, bombing runs 120. When have you heard France wanting to go to war? And I thought about you. I thought, wow, when it gets bad enough, in France, there's a lot of bad juju going on in their banks, a lot of bad things in their economy. And what are they doing? Going to war. I mean, it was a terrible attack, don't get me wrong. I mean, hundreds killed and or injured and horrible. But the Middle East is ramping up and getting worse, not better, correct? How do you, what's your appraisal of the Middle East and the war card going on there?
I don't know if you can get any, there's worse and worse. It's almost as bad as you can. It's as bad as you can get without dropping a nuclear bomb, and it's going to stay bad from everything I can tell. I think this is a very complex story. I think part of it is, you're right, France is the banks. Part of this is the economic and the need for war and weapon sales and everything like that. But I'll tell you, I'm very curious. I don't know if you've seen the bunker buster bombs go off, the videos of those bombs.
Oh, yeah.
I'm assuming you have. So my question is, who and what is underground? If you look at those bombings, we're talking about massive infrastructure underground. And I would love to know what's going on down there, including with organized crime, because I think you've got organized crime in this picture in a big way. I mean, ISIS does according to whoever pays them. So that's the question. Who's paying them? Where's the money coming from? Yes, some of it is oil sales, but, they have major financial patrons to grow that big that fast. And they're paying everybody. So you've got an area in the world where nobody has any work, and somebody's paying somebody a lot of money. So the reality is, if you look at the payment systems, Greg, the sovereign governments have to know. That money can't move around without the sovereign governments knowing. Or
they have to know who's paying them.
Yeah. I'll never forget when I was working with a reporter from Washington who was talking to a very top guy. He used to work. He was retired from the DEA. And he sat down at lunch with her and he said, hey, look, all the wires batch and go through the New York Fed. They know where every penny is. So, the reality is, I don't see how ISIS can happen unless the sovereign governments of G7 allow it to happen. It doesn't, it doesn't make any sense. So the question is, what's really going on? And the picture is very murky. It's very murky.
Do you know,
and frankly,
do they want war? Are they trying to get war? Are they trying to, somebody said, who was it, Warren Pollock, I had him on, he says, they might be wanting to use, and he wasn't sure, but he's saying they might be wanting to use war as a resetting mechanism. Again, back to you, and you said this years ago, that the economy, we'd have war before we went into a full-on crash. Is that what you think, that maybe they're wanting war as a resetting mechanism?
What I think is, if you're watching what's going on, I see tremendous tension within the military-industrial complex in the United States. So you see one part that wants to go to war, and I think is very aggressively promoting war. The other wants to balance the budget and knows that economically we're overextended and we have to pull back. And that, I think, is the big tension. So, and this is right at the heart of, are we going to be greedy and keep everything to ourselves? Or are we going to move to a multipolar world? Whatever happens, if it's done by a coalition of a variety of different countries, then we have to share the benefits. And I think you've got a portion within the military-industrial complex that wants to, run out the Bretton Woods as long as possible, and another saying, hey, we've got to have to shift to a multipolar world, let's do it. So you have the people who are ready to cooperate in a multipolar world, the people who aren't, and there's tremendous tension inside. And a lot of it gets back to what you and I are talking about, who's getting what cash flows out of the government.
Catherine Alston-Fitz, Solar Report, solarreport.com or solari.com. This is the latest third quarter report, when you prove over and over again why you are one of the smartest people on the internet and why in the investment world. I mean, and just so people know, I mean, you have handled hundreds of billions of dollars in assets and investments. You're a big hitter. You're a real person, and I really appreciate you coming back on. A lot of people said you weren't going to come on, and I said, no, she will. I want you to come back on.
Wonderful, thanks. What?
And I wanted you to come back on, and you wanted to come back on.
Yeah, always.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, I like to fight. Come on, let's fight.
Well, that was I could have handled myself a little better on that one, and I'm sorry about that. But anyway, thank you for coming on, and I appreciate you coming on USAWatchdog.com. And please come back.
I will. Bye.
All right. Bye bye.